And so we then continued flying on weekends and going out to Hunter Field in Cedar Rapids. And then they start laying concrete for a large airport in Cedar Rapids, which is now known as Cedar Rapids International Airport. So when the concrete solidified, we'd sneak over and do landings on it because it felt so good on a concrete runway. And so now it is a huge international airport with a lot of traffic. Those were back then was the good old days, we said. And so as time went on, we would fly up to Bemidji, Minnesota, and it had a lake, and we'd go up there for walleye fishing. And that was very interesting. It was a very small village, and in fact, it was the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and we were able to step across the headwaters of the Mississippi River. This was Indian territory. They had wild rice, and we'd be able to purchase some of that and take it back to Cedar Rapids. We'd fly up to Minneapolis, and then Wasco, William A. Smith and Company, was one of the members of the flying club. And so then he asked me if I would be a pilot for him, and because he was a manufacturer's representative. So we flew a couple of years like that between Minneapolis and Cedar Rapids, Chicago, Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri. So we did a lot of cross-country flying and met with a lot of corporations like Sears and Roebuck. So that was interesting. And then one day Dr. Prout said to me, you know, you're now going to be, you know, you can't keep on flying. You know, in those days, you know, you get to 30, you're pretty old to be flying. That's what they considered. So he said, you ought to think about your GI Bill and get some education. And so he flew me down to Palmer College in Davenport, Iowa. And that's when he introduced me to a college where he had graduated in 1923. And so we went there a couple of trips and were shown around and then introduced to certain doctors there and invited to participate with the GI Bill, which then I decided to do. So Davenport, Iowa is where I called home. And I met a fellow student, and he helped me find a room in a 2-story house, and it had gables and a little door. And I was able to rent that room. You open the door and there was a bed in there for $10, I think it was $10 a month. And so that's where I stayed. And that evening that I checked in there, the girl across the hall introduced herself. She was a French girl. So she decided to take me on a tour down to Davenport, Iowa. So we walked down the streets and looked in the windows, et cetera, et cetera. And that was my first introduction to Davenport, Iowa, which was fine. And so as I attended class, like any other scientific medical school, they had a lot of studying to do. And I spent a lot of time there, and I also worked on the side. My buddy Max got us a job as night cleaning offices at Stockbrokers Stockbrokers Corporation. We'd clean those offices, and then we'd go across the river, the Mississippi River, to Moline, and we had a contract to clean a large bank, which was beautiful. It was all marble and brass, so we really worked hard to do that. And then later on, I drove a taxi, which was one of the first radio-controlled taxis. So they would call in, and I would go answer the calls. So I enjoyed that, and I was familiar with radio because I used radio communication in aircraft, so that was familiar to me. Then later on, I also was a chef at the Blue Devil restaurant, two blocks away. And when the students came over, I would see that they had plenty to eat. And on Fridays, we would have deep fried fish, catfish from the Mississippi River. And we had two waitresses. And so when we closed up at 11, I had to take the waitresses home, naturally. And yes, pardon me. And I had a 1948 Oldsmobile convertible. So that was always handy to have because the students liked riding in that. And I was a good dresser as a student. In fact, later on, there was a female that told me, you know, you were one of the 10 best dressers in the college. So that was a compliment. And I still try to keep abreast of dressing. Okay, so then I'm working at the Blue Devil Cafe, and business is doing well. And then I have a friend, Dr. Brown. He had a practice in Davenport, and he was a retired executive from Ford Motor Company. Well-dressed, a very good profession. Knew his wife, and I had rented an apartment above a garage next door to them up in the Heights there in Davenport. And we became good friends. So as time goes on, there was a group of graduates in 1953 that wanted to go up to Wisconsin and take the state board so they could practice in Wisconsin. So I offered my services of the 1948 Oldsmobile convertible, and so we tooled up there to Wisconsin at well, here we are on the way to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And as we went up through the dells in Wisconsin, which is lakes and it's beautiful, we were in Milwaukee, and there was, I think, 6 of us. And so we got a couple of hotel rooms, and we got settled down. And then during the daytime, we went through the Schlitz brewery, and we all loved Schlitz beer, and we enjoyed it. So we were taking a walk down the street, and there's an A board on the sidewalk in front of this little nightclub, and it says Gogi Grant from L.A. is our featured singer. So I said, well, I'm from L.A., let's go in and check this out. So we go in, and it's in the afternoon, and I go to the bar and said, you know, I'm from L.A., is it possible seeing Gogi Grant? And he said, well, she doesn't come on until in the evening. And I said, well, okay, we'll be back. So I went there in the evening, and we had just missed her show, and I'm sitting at the bar, and they sent for Gogi Grant. She came up, we introduced ourselves, and we talked about L.A., and so she said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you boys will come back at 11 o'clock, then I'll put a special performance on for you. So we did. And so, being that we were all these young little doctors, she says, welcome to all you young little doctors. I'm going to perform a special vocal program for you. And this is for Harvey. So that started our friendship for the next 53 years. When I got back to Palmer College, I had a friend across the street at WHO radio station, and so he interviewed me, and I was pitching Gogi Grant's music all over the Midwest. And we would communicate, and they would play all her records at the college, and we had a great time. So after graduation, then I moved back to LA, and at that time you had to spend another year in Los Angeles in order to get your license because your education was out of the state of California. So I went to LACC and spent a year there, and that's when I contacted Gogi Grant because she was in Hollywood, and at that time she was singing on the Sears TV program, and so she invited me to come up and see the program, which I did. Afterward, we had coffee, and she presented me with a vinyl copy of her music, and so I enjoyed that, and we continued to have friendship for years after that. In fact, we had a date, and we went out at Earl Carroll's, which is a very classy nightclub in Hollywood, and at that point, I had that 48-old Oldsmobile convertible, which was not up to great standards. So my friend Harvey, Big Harvey, the police officer, loaned me his Cadillac, a brand new suit, and $50 so I could go up to Hollywood and entertain Gogi Grant. So I picked her up. Oh, she had a manager, Jack. He watched her like a hawk. So she had told Jack she was going to visit her sister. So that's where I picked her up at her sister's house. And then we went over through the Hollywood Hills and out to Hollywood and to Earl Carroll's. And we had a wonderful evening. And as we walked in, she was recognized naturally by these directors. And so she introduced me to these directors, and we had dinner there. And the entertainment was two young boys, and I can't think of their names now, who become very famous in the entertainment world. So that was quite a thrill for me to be able, and I have the pictures naturally, and I still cherish those.